Okay, so today we're going to take a look at various ways that From Software could buff some of the worst weapon classes. These are just my suggestions. You know, there's a lot of different ways weapons can be buffed, honestly. Like, there's various things that can make a weapon good, but these are just some of my suggestions. I hope you enjoy. All right. Now we're getting into like more broad stuff, you know, things to change that would be nice if they got buffed and if they changed, but we're getting into the territory of we have a long list of buffs for weapons to become viable. So we appreciate that From Software went out of its way to bring back Ultra Greatsword to the point where they were useless after they nerfed it, but they buffed it back, so they're somewhat usable again. Personally, I don't think they're that great anymore still, but it's still nice that they buffed it. I really appreciate that they made Fist relevant. I still see people think Fist are overpowered. Fist are fine, honestly. They're pretty fine. They're not really top setups, you know. And they would still get shit on by straight swords and whatnot. But they're still in a place where they can compete. They're good enough so that they can compete with good setups. And this is what you want out of your weapons. You want more weapons to be good enough so that they can compete with the good setups. Okay, so let's take a look at all the weapon classes that I think needs a buff. If we look at all the weapon classes, I have also suggestions for pretty much every weapon class, but let's look at, you know, for the most part, which weapon class is underpowered. I think great swords are underpowered. Great swords are gonna need some love. I think curved great swords are underpowered. And when I say underpowered, I don't mean damage-wise necessarily. I'm talking about the moveset and how good or bad the weapon is, period. I think axes are still underpowered as well, even if they recently buffed it. I think great axes are underpowered, even if you have some crazy damage with like the jumping attack, which is pretty much the only thing this weapon has. But I still think they are somewhat underpowered as well. I still think also maces and hammers are underpowered as well. They also got a recent buff, which was nice. You know, the club moveset is more usable now, which is good. But I still think that the weapon could have something extra. Personally, a lot of these, like my suggestion to make these classes better, would actually be to give them an R2 that's usable. So increasing not necessarily the speed of the overall R2, but the speed of the release. So when you do an R2, you can release it a lot faster, and you can pretty much roll catch with them. Not just the speed of the release of the R2, but the travel distance when you release that R2 as well. So that all these weapons could have an R2 that can somewhat roll catch. So I think that would be a good addition to pretty much all these underpowered weapon classes. And you know, that includes the flail, that includes great hammers, that include colossal weapons, not colossal greatsword, but the colossal weapons. You know, it's fun to have an R2 like this, right? But the release is still too slow and still too easy to reaction roll. You know, just an increase to the release speed of an R2 like this would go a long way to make a weapon like that more viable, without making it, you know, a fast weapon with the same identity as the fast weapon classes, right? Let's see here. Let's just make sure we didn't forget. You know, halberds are fine, sights are fine, whips are actually fine too, fist weapons are fine too. You know, it's really, for the most part, the bigger classes and the axe and hammers. Usually those are the culprit for being underpowered. And also, another thing that I have not seen mentioned anywhere that would be really helpful for the health of the game, for you to be able to use like your favorite weapon without like changing the game upside down. Like this is probably, like, if I were to suggest a fix that is time efficient and that would take little effort from software, that could improve the entire game, it would be, listen to this, in the DLC, if they introduce an Ash of War that is a fast attack that has about the speed of a side crouch attack, which is very reaction rollable, but it's fast enough to be a threat to mix up anything from there. If they had an Ash of War that has that sort of speed, you would automatically make all these weapons a lot better. So if they only had an Ash of War that you can put on anything that has similar speed to this, that can be used, and honestly, if it could also poise break, that would kind of be your bread and butter to start like every attack. Now you could say that this could hurt variety of attacks, but you have to pick your poison, because either you make each and every single weapon that you have here, you adjust the moveset for it to be viable, or you apply a solution that works across the board. So to me, my suggestion is to have a fast Ash of War that can be used, that's low damage, needs to be low damage, because it should be kind of a sort of threat to initiate a mix-up from. So if you have that attack that's fast, but that does, let's say, even 100 damage, which is very, very low, does 100 damage, but from that 100 damage, you have the threat of a fast attack, and then you can start mixing it up for something like an R2, like we suggested, that has more forward momentum and a better release speed. So this is my suggestion for most weapons. Now, there's also some specific things that I would also like to add on top of that. Oh yeah, changes to parries and riposte. Personally, I've not really seen a lot of people mention this, but I think that the way the whole parrying thing is in this game is kind of, it's not problematic, it's not busted, it's not underpowered, it's not overpowered, but it's not in a good place either. It's too, it's a bit too, like, it's either one way or the other, you know? Like, you can spam parry without ever getting punished, and when you get the parry, you get the one-shot, you know what I mean? So, honestly, I would actually do a few changes that are related to riposte. So, here's the deal. I would, first of all, reduce the riposte critical modifier of the Misericord dagger specifically, and I would not change the riposte modifier of the normal dagger, so they would both be at 130, and I would increase the critical modifier for all other daggers by 10, so that daggers like this that are at 110 would be 120. Critical modifier, daggers that are at 100 would be at 110. So pretty much this is a critical damage modifier to all daggers, a critical damage modifier buff to all daggers except Misericord, which can right now one-shot. And obviously we would not touch the normal dagger, because otherwise we would put it in the same place Misericord was. So this is my suggestion for the critical damage. On top of that, I would also actually increase the recovery after parrying, so that you cannot just spam parry and get away like instantly. I think when you know a parry is coming and you're almost behind your opponent, it should be a backstab. You know, parries should still be punishable by backstab. Right now, the problem with parries is it's almost impossible to punish them when you're at point blank and you know the parry is about to come. If you have not already initiated a jumping attack, which even then, like the jumping attack can sometimes work, but the problem is when you're at point blank like that, and you know a parry is coming, a lot of time you don't even have time for the jumping attack. That's the issue. Whereas if the recovery was slightly longer, you would have enough time to go for a backstab, since you knew the parry was coming, you're already point blank, you're almost behind your opponent's back, but they would not be able to just mindlessly parry and get away scot-free every single time. So I think increasing the recovery for the parry slightly would be a good addition to the game overall. Also, and since we're talking about riposte and critical, I've seen this suggestion mentioned by a viewer, and I don't disagree with it. When you guard break someone with large weapons, we're talking about, you know, like seriously large weapons, like, you know, colossals and whatnot. Like, From Software advertises a lot of these jumping R2 attacks as, you know, having the ability to break guards, because these R2 attacks are what do, like, these are the attack that do the highest amount of stamina damage. But here's the issue, though. Most of the time, the recovery is so slow on these attacks that you don't even have time to grab the riposte after you break someone's guard. So I always thought that was a bit strange. It's definitely an oversight. I think the window is just a little bit too tight for breaking guards with bigger weapon. But since breaking guard is a window that's kind of present across the board, I think I would like slightly increase the window for taking a riposte after breaking guard by only a few frames. This is a little tweak that I think would be a good addition. It was suggested by someone. I don't disagree with it. I think it's a good idea because you know, these weapons that have very slow recovery don't have enough time to grab the riposte after they break guard. So that would be one thing I would suggest as well. And then in the same vein, you know, we can't talk about riposte damage without mentioning the bug where you get the riposte, and because the opponent rolled on their screen, you get no damage on your riposte. I think they need to fix that no riposte damage problem. It was not an issue in Dark Souls 3, their last Souls game, so it should not be too hard to fix. So I think they need to address the no riposte damage as well. This should be considered a bug fix and not a balance change, though. Right, also, more specific changes to weapons. There is one in particular that always bothered me. Let's take it right here. You know, some straight swords have really cool R2s. Like, look at that. Oops, not this one. Look at that. This right here, you block and then you attack afterward. Problem is, though, that blocking gets pretty much broken like near instantly by like very by puny weapons. Like, you can break that guard with like a clean rot weapon or any trusting sword. So I think this particular R2 here, it needs to have more guard ability on that attack. So like these R2s here that are supposed to be blocking an attack and then countering afterward, I think they need to actually be better at blocking, and not necessarily at damage reduction, but just straight up not getting guard broken. And actually, while we're talking about this, why not give it just a little bit of damage reduction when you're doing this, like just a tiny bit, because I don't know if you guys ever tried to use this unironically. They're bad. Alright, speaking of straight swords, you know, even if straight swords are not a bad weapon, they're not underpowered at all. You know, these R2s here, I think these R2s could have a bit more forward momentum. I think R2s having more forward momentum is it's a recurring theme in this game. Like most R2s in this game are very bad in PvP. They're not very usable because they don't even travel far enough to catch a roll. So I think like straight sword here, perfect example of an R2 that needs more forward momentum. There's also other R2s that could get help, but in a different way, and I'm talking about, you guys that played Dark Souls 3 would salivate at this. Look at that. You remember this, right? The Black Knight Great Axe R2. You guys remember this? Let's do it on the rock so we can see the fire sparkles. Right? Well, the problem with this R2 is that there's no hitbox on the axe that's on the ground that makes sparkles. It's the same thing with the Godric's Great Axe. These attacks have no hitbox when they're on the ground like that. And these R2s, for those of you who don't know, these R2s had a hitbox in Dark Souls 3 when they were on the ground like that, and they were very hard to pull off, but extremely rewarding. And I think this is what these R2s for these Great Axe need. These R2s in particular that kind of slide on the floor like that, the Crescent and Godric, are a good example. These R2s need to have a hitbox on the ground, just like Black Knight Great Axe did in Dark Souls 3. That would be an amazing change to make these weapons have an actual purpose. That was very, very fun. They were like a Black Knight Greatsword and Black Knight Great Axe, or Black Knight Ultra Greatsword and Black Knight Great Axe in Dark Souls 3 were two of the most fun weapons, and they were not very overpowered either. It's just that that particular R2 was very rewarding and took skills to pull off, because it kind of gave a short window in front of you to get some sort of big damage. Either way, I would still suggest to From Software that they take note from Dark Souls 3. Even though we don't want the game to be Dark Souls 3, there's still some things that could be taken notes on, and that particular R2 is one of them. Alright, another thing I mentioned on my list for buffing some of these horrible weapons. Look at that. Look at how useless this is. This is like a joke. So I think this spin Ash of War, same thing with the actual spin Ash of War. I think these spins should have more range. I think, you know, look at how I'm holding this this flail. There's still room on the weapon to like to hold it like actually maybe not this one. Honestly, I would increase the range of the ball spin, even if it has some phantom range. Like, this attack needs to have more range than this, because it's pretty much completely useless. There's just no way you're really ever going to hit someone with this. Whereas opposed to you guys know the staff, right? There's a magic staff that has a similar spin, but that travels further. So the magic spin from the staff is fine in this game. But I think, you know, flails and this spin Ash of War doesn't need to be as far as the magic spin from the staff, but it would still help if the spin could, you know, not travel, but could have a bit more range to be usable. Alright, another suggestion with hammers. You know, hammers have a decent crouch attack. I think, though, that a lot of these hammer attacks are very, very short, and like the whole moveset for great hammers could benefit from more forward momentum, and more, except obviously the jumping attacks. But like this R2 here, you could lunge a lot more forward with this. Actually, it would make more sense too, because look at this heavy chunk of steel. Your body is going to automatically be pushed forward when you're swinging this big chunk of steel. So I think great hammers should have a lot more forward momentum on their R2s, even on their R1, on their crouch attack, even on their running attacks. You know, all of these, they could have more forward momentum to be made more usable. But like I said, this is kind of a recurring theme for all these bad weapons. They're all short weapons that are very easy to space. They don't have anything to offer. If you give them more forward momentum, you're gonna make them more usable, and you're gonna bring a weapon class that's kind of garbage to a point where it can be used to compete with other good setups. This is our goal here, is to make bad weapons not as good as the best weapons, because we don't want, like, it's impossible to make every weapons the best weapons. We understand that, and not all weapons need to be amazing either. But like we suggested with the Crescent Axe here, you know, having an R2 like that has a hitbox when you're charging the weapon like this, it does not make the weapon necessarily amazing, but it just gives a little something to each class. This is what we want. We want to give every class that little something that gives you a reason to explore that weapon class and to use it. It doesn't need to be the best, it just needs to have something to be worth using. Because right now, a lot of these weapons are just bad, and are pretty much just a copy of one another. And I'm not even talking within the same class, but a lot of these weapons are just pretty much very short, you know, attacks that do similar amount of damage. You know, when you look at this, when you look at this, even when you look at, you know, at this here, when you look at this, you know, like, I understand that it's not exactly the same speed and not exactly the same range, but all these weapon classes really don't offer much, you know, in terms of being different from one another. Like, I think it's cool to have like R2s like that, but even this, the release could have more forward momentum on this. When it comes to this one here, it has a unique moveset, so this one actually does not really apply to what I said, because this one actually has a purpose, which is funny because it's a poke attack. But for the most part, all these various weapon class don't really have a purpose or anything unique, so all these suggestions that we're putting up front are things that could be done to make the weapons more viable and to give them a little something. And I also want to mention, see here, this R2 here. This R2 is a good example of an R2 that has a fast release on Colossal. The only issue is that you're never going to hit someone with this because it's way too short. And I think this is a mix of some things we want from more of these bigger weapons. A fast R2 release like that, but we want more forward momentum on it, so that it can actually catch people and not just look like we have a fast release, but it won't ever catch anyone because it's too short. So here you go. That's an example of like the kind of R2 release that we want. All right, and that's going to be it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this piece again. I want to mention this is just my suggestions, some of the things that I would go for. These are just, to get the community talking about what they would want for some of the worst weapons and whatnot. If you have not watched my top 5 and top 3 most important Elden Ring balance changes, I would suggest you do so, as this whole piece is kind of like a one recording that I divided in multiple pieces, but it's all part of pretty much one project. Alright guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll catch you guys up next time. Take it easy.